Hey everyone, welcome back to Nerdium, the podcast where two grown men like to pretend that we have our lives together, so we take a little break from adulting and focus on the really important things that affect our lives. Comics, TV, movies, and of course video games. And this week kids, Matt and I decided to take a break from hanging out in the basement by ourselves and invite two new friends to come and hang out and talk all things nerd. That's right, for the first time ever, Matt and I decided to do a real life interview with real life people. So joining us today on the couch are two prolific writers from Marvel Comics, Lonnie Nadler and Zac Thompson. You guys out there might know their work with Cable, the Spider-Verse, and of course their own projects such as her Infernal Descent. So pop a squat on the couch beside Matt and I while we talk comics, the industry, and why Matt and I are insanely jealous these guys get to play in it. Matt, when you're ready, start the music. Oh, and by the way, I totally know I said Spider-Verse instead of Spider-Verse, but that's just... It's late, Matt. It's just too late. Hit the music.
Joined today by Lonnie and Zac, both from out in Vancouver.
And we should point out that this is actually our very first guests.
Yeah, so expect a very low standard from us.
Yeah, please expect nothing fantastic.
All right, so what's the weather like out in Vancouver today?
It is crappy and not very sunny, and we usually have like 5 months of sun, so this is now we're transitioning into the 7 months of darkness.
My preferred existence is in the 7 months of darkness.
Well, that definitely makes two of us. We're starting to get the short days and the high overcast and the nice cool nights, so I'm certainly not complaining too much.
Zac and Lonnie both work for Marvel, writing comics. How did you guys get into writing comics?
I mean, Lonnie and I went to film school together. It seems like everyone who ends up writing comics didn't start trying to write comics. We met just because we had a mutual love for film and we were talking about different ideas, and eventually what ended up being our first book, The Dregs, was kind of like an old screenplay that I had that was not a very good screenplay, but it had a good central idea. And so we sat down and tried to see if we could like turn that into something, and then eventually pitched it literally, I don't know, like almost everywhere, and every company said no until we got to Black Mask, and they were very enthusiastically a yes. But I think before that we both had worked on our own, like making small comic projects and that kind of thing, and showing up at Comic Cons and being those like really nerdy guys who are like, hey, we want to do what you do, comic book writer. And they're like, cool, but like, go away. And then we didn't go away.
Well, I mean, you just told you to go away, not stay away from the field. Yeah. Go, it's awful.
I mean, I wish they said that. But really, like, I think it's mostly just about like, you know, deciding that that's something that you want to do, and then just, you know, being the guy who keeps showing up and keeps doing the work. And now with the opportunity to like do indie publishing and Kickstarter and all kinds of things, there's no reason to not be able to break into comics. There's no such thing as not being able to break in, because you can literally make your own key and open the door through indie publishing.
Yeah, that whole Kickstarter stuff's kind of really changed the game a bit, eh?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like just even 10 years ago, obviously that wasn't possible, but within the last 5 years, Zac and I have seen so many books become popular over Kickstarter that then get picked up at publishers, and it's really just completely changed the market for creators who are trying to do something different that might not work for a publisher trying to make something that appeals to a certain audience. I think you sort of have to use Kickstarter sometimes as a proving ground to say, hey, look, this book does work and there is an audience for it, before publishers will take a risk on it.
It's kind of cool because you get some kind of new ideas that you never used to get, where the big publishers kind of liked using the kind of safe and tried and tested kind of plots or kind of art, and need a lot of these indie stuff that bring a lot of kind of new, something new to the table kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these indie books at least give us a new perspective on, like, new takes on superheroes that maybe the big publisher may have been afraid to take on, a little bit worried, maybe something that they may see as something dangerous to the public eye. They don't want too much backlash. But if you get a big enough following, that backlash is softened by the fact that you get, that other following coming behind saying, no, we really do care about this, even though it's a little controversial. This is something we support in the community.
Yeah, it's always a delicate balance, and I think we've seen that quite a bit, even with, like, to some extent, small indie publishers have a reputation for a certain type of storytelling that they want to kind of protect it, and they don't want to do things that are, like, I don't know if this is the correct term, but it's the first that comes to mind is, like, brand unsafe. And you certainly experience it with licensed characters a lot more, where there's a certain expectation that a branded character acts a certain way and is engaged in a certain type of story. And, we're no strangers to the idea that, like, most of the most memorable stories for any superhero character are the ones that break the mold. But that comes at a lot of risk, and you really do have to prove yourself over and over and over again before someone's going to be like, hey, what's a good idea? Vision moves to the suburbs and creates a family. As I know for a fact that if we pitched that would never get approved. But, someone like Tom King can pitch that. And even, you look at that book as an example, and that was canceled. There wasn't an audience there, and they thought that they were making a mistake, but they let him finish out his story, which is, and then, you look at Mr. Miracle, and the proof is there that audiences want, like, indie sensibility approaches to big two storytelling. Absolutely. Or licensed character storytelling, but there's a lot of risk in that. You really do have to take someone like Mr. Miracle that people don't care about beforehand to take that risk.
Well, it's funny. I remember when Mr. Miracle, they started tweeting nonstop, and I thought, now that's a weird character that just suddenly popped up out of nowhere. Like, I always knew he existed, but kind of more on the peripherals. And I saw what they started doing with it, and you're very right about that. Like, it is a lot easier, instead of taking a Batman or a Superman, where you can kind of play a little bit more with these ancillary characters, you have a little bit more wiggle room involved there. So that being said, what's been your experience with some of these heavy Marvel franchises that you guys have had a chance to work with?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when we first started working at Marvel, our first gig there was Cable as part of the X-Men office, and we had a pitch there that was, like, pretty crazy and not fully in line with the character that they'd actually approved. And then we wrote a script, and they were like, oh no, like, this is not going to work for us. And so they made us go back to the drawing board and do something. It wasn't necessarily more, like, safe or anything. It was just more on brand with the character that they know and that fans know. But after that, it's largely been a lot of freedom that we've been surprised about. We thought there was going to be a lot of meddling, but for the past 6 months, we've felt like we've been given a lot of freedom in the X-Men office to do what we want. And, that's not to say we're doing crazy, like, 18-panel pages and stuff where we get away with that kind of stuff, but character decisions and story decisions that we are, I think we're telling stories that we're proud of is what it comes down to, and it doesn't feel like we're being put into a box too much.
No, and I mean, like, we can't go into detail about what our X-Men Black story is with Apocalypse, but I promise you, when that comes out and people read it, I still, like, laugh maniacally to myself that that's the story that got approved, because it's actually insane. Like, it's the type of thing that, like, there's no real good reason to publish that story and in the form that it's in, and I think it's going to rock people's worlds, and we never received a note that we're like, you guys are going too far, or this is, like, crazy, like, and we actively tried to bring it to a place where they're going to be like, no, and we just got green lights.
You took the opposite road of what can we really get away with here.
Yeah, well, and it's also just like, what is new? What can we show people that they haven't seen before? How can we put this? We've been tasked with, writing Cable, which is a complicated 90s character. And then immediately after, they're like, hey, want to write an even more complicated 90s character? Here's Apocalypse. And so when you do that kind of stuff, I think it really does, you have to rely on thinking outside the box and going like, how can I take this character who can literally do everything and take most of that away from them?
So since you guys get to play, I know you guys have your own projects like separate from Marvel, but one of the things we see out in the world when people approach various franchises with new ideas, there's always the embrace from fans, but then there's always quite often a backlash. People, like we said earlier, people are afraid of new ideas and stuff like that. How have you been? How do you feel you've been received by like that rabid fandom out there? People that really take their comic books, the franchises, super duper personally.
I think we've been extremely welcomed by the vast majority of X-Men fans. It's been sort of overwhelming how positive it is. And, we get a tweet here and there that's like, oh, the X-Men are doing this again. How boring. Couldn't they find writers with better ideas? But that stuff is so far and few between that the reality is, since we've started working at Marvel, we've had so many people reach out and just been like, oh, I love what you're doing, or even just talking to us about the characters, because people have such a strong affinity for the Summers family or characters like Nightcrawler or Xavier, who have been around for so long. And I think it was just us realizing that, Zac and I have been playing with X-Men action figures or reading comics since we were, 5 or 6 years old. And it's created this huge community of people that just love it. And for us to be able to be on the side of it that's, participating in and helping build this massive canon that already exists, and for fans to be reacting to that in a positive way, it really just means it's hard to describe in words how great it makes us feel.
When you were working on the Cable comics there, what were some of the qualities that you felt were important to write in Cable's character for your story?
What do you mean exactly by qualities?
Like some of the kind of staple characteristics of Cable that you find were important to kind of maintain that kind of image of Cable.
So for us, for our run, it's called Past Fears. And one of the things that we looked at a lot with Cable was kind of how he played like a fatherly role for a lot of different people in the Marvel universe and in the X-Men universe in particular. And we try to really look at like that big soldier persona and go, okay, how do we fit that with the father? How do we fit that with the family aspect that's so important to the X-Men? And it was a lot about finding the through line for the character that would exist over time, like those soldier aspects, and then thinking about the things that would be a better emotional core for him, because there's a lot of Cable comics that don't have that emotional core, that just have a lot of guns blazing and everything. And I think that you can get away with less of that guns blazing stuff if you give people emotion, if you make people care about the action. And I think one of the things that we always butted our heads against when we were scripting Cable was, how do we make the action matter? How do we make it matter to him? And how do we make it matter to the characters who are involved in this particular issue? And that was the thing that I think we're most conscious of, because he is like a big kind of like bro-y character who just like is, he's the 90s embodied, like almost to a T. Like that's what comics were in the early 90s. They're big guns, like thighs that were the size of like a cow, and, like 12 packs on men's chests. So how do you take that and distill it down to something that actually has emotional weight?
Okay, yeah. You guys, for that storyline, had him kind of looking after, I believe, Hope Summers?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it was reuniting them, because we had read, there's an older run on the character that Dwayne Szynski wrote, and he had Cable on the road in the wasteland with young Hope, and we kept going through the modern Cable comics, and we're like, wait a second, how in the hell has he never been reunited with her? How have they never talked about what they went through? And there were moments throughout Marvel continuity that they had interacted, but no one really made them talk about how estranged they had become, and that was really important to us. And then we kind of built outward from there, and we're like, well, Cable's kind of estranged from all of his family relationships. So that's why we built a crazy arc that goes backwards in time.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. What did you guys think of Brolin's portrayal of Cable and Deadpool 2?
Don't tell anyone, but I haven't seen it yet.
It's just heresy on this channel.
I'm very ashamed.
Well, you guys probably fall into the same trap that we do, and that is there's just not enough hours in the day to not only get done everything you want to get done, but also manage to try and find that time where you can just sit down, turn off, and dedicate 2 hours to staring at a box for a while.
Yeah, exactly. It was so funny because I remember when it was coming out, Zach and I were both like, we got to go see this movie. Like, we were pretty excited about it. And Zach went like the first day or the first week or something. And then I was just like, oh yeah, I guess I'll go see it next week. And then I was like, I guess I'll go see it next week. I guess I'll go see it next week. And it just never ended up happening.
I'm gonna go and see it, and then it's coming out on DVD next week. Great.
Yeah, I do plan on picking it up so I can actually finally watch it.
And what about you, Zach? What did you think?
I thought it was dope. I really enjoyed his portrayal, and I thought it was pretty accurate. And I mean, like, I wasn't super pleased with how it spends more than half of the movie giving him like little to no character development. But as you get towards the end of the second act and into the third, like he becomes the Cable that I'm very much in love with. So I was really pumped about that. And you know, there's a lot of nods in there to Cable's like long history that I enjoyed, like just little tiny things that made me very, very happy as a fan. So I can't complain. I never thought we'd live in a world where we'd see Cable on the big screen, let alone played by Josh Brolin. So
yeah,
I'm into it.
Yeah, no, like so much kind of, as you guys have already said, like kind of a backstory to Cable where he could almost have his own movie. So it was kind of interesting that they kind of put in with Deadpool. There was that Deadpool and Cable comic a little while ago. So I liked it, but I didn't get to see it in theaters because, as Cary mentioned,
well, life just keeps getting in the way.
Yeah,
we know all about that.
So what are you guys working on now? I see that you guys were doing some stuff with Spider-Man characters and Spider-Geddon.
Yeah, we just had a one shot in the Spider-Geddon lead up, Edge of Spider-Geddon, but we got to write like Spider SP//DR, which is weird. But it's a character that Gerard Way created a couple years ago for Edge of the Spider-Verse. And it's like a near future manga sort of version of Spider-Man. And it's
like Pacific
yeah,
Rim
that's
Spider-Man.
a good description of it. And we only got to do the one issue, but we absolutely loved working on it, and I think it was a ton of fun just to get to work in like an Elseworld where you kind of get to like, we got to create a new version of Venom for that book, which was really fun. And you know, that has its own Wikipedia page now, which I was kind of blown away by. But really, though, yeah, I mean, it sort of like part of the reason to do this is for those little small victories where you're like, look, like, I don't know, it's real weird to create a character in the Marvel universe. It's even weirder to see someone like read that issue and then take the time to like build out that character's bio and put it on a Wikipedia page. It'll never get old.
I mean, I think volumes to the work that you guys have done where it's reached out and it's obviously touched quite a few people. Where if anything, you've inspired them to go out and carry on the footprint that you put in there.
I mean, yeah, that's the hope. Like that, I think that's the cool thing about superhero comics, especially working in them, is that, you know, people complain that things are cyclical or that events don't matter, but there's also like, you know, whether or not I agree with it, there's an attitude in comics where every issue should be someone's first issue, and you know, familiar characters need to come back to life and everything, but like even to contribute to that legacy where, you know, you're probably 10 steps removed, but you're still standing on Jack Kirby's shoulders somewhere along the way. It's pretty damn cool, even if it might not matter in the long run.
Well, I think in the great grand scheme, it might, you know, 30, 40 years from now, it might not matter. But I think the important thing is that right now in this moment, you guys get to have your effect on that universe, and you guys get to bring it in a direction where you've always dreamed. Like I said before, you've spent years growing up playing with the toys and working around the franchise. So I definitely admire the opportunity to actually work with the things that we all got to love and enjoy as a kid.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's I was thinking about it just the other day. Like I literally used to sit in my room for hours with my sister, and I would make up stories like specifically with the X-Men. Um, and now it doesn't feel all that different. Like Zach and I just hang out every day, and we just talk about characters that we love, and to be able to, like I said before, contribute to this stuff it just never feels real, and it still makes me feel like a kid. And I don't think I could ask for a better job in the world. I feel very, very
Awesome.
lucky.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are really living the dream.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to.
Outside of all your Marvel stuff there, which I know we've spent a great deal talking about, any independent projects you guys want to let us know about?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a few. We've got a couple that are in development right now that we can't speak about, but there's a couple that we have coming out over the course of this year, one of which is Her Infernal Descent. That's a book that we're doing at Aftershock. It's about a middle-aged mother who goes into hell to look for her family. It's kind of like a weird modern retelling of Dante's Inferno. And we have released 4 issues of that so far, and the 5th will be out, I think, in November-ish. And then the trade will be out in December. And it's basically like a tribute to both of our moms. It's a weird sort of like book that's laden with literary references and kind of like a certain reverence for Dante's Inferno, the original piece of literature, but also just literature itself, and the relationship that Lonnie and I have had with that over the course of our lives. And then Lonnie can probably speak to her other super weird book.
Yeah, our other book is it's called Come Into Me, which is a pretty salacious title, and that's coming out through Black Mask. And that was actually the first project that Zach and I ever worked on together. It took years for it to actually come to fruition, but it was born out of our love for David Cronenberg and technology and body horror and philosophy. And it's a super strange book about a guy who invents a technology that allows 2 people to share one body, and the devastating effects that has on the flesh and on the mind. And there's 3 issues of that out right now. The 4th and last one should be out sometime next month. And that's probably the book that Zach and I have done that we're most proud of. It's very weird. It's experimental. We think it's scary. And we also think it's talking about some pretty important and relevant themes in terms of how we engage with technology. So, yeah, plenty of weirdness out there from Zach and I.
Well, I think a little bit of weirdness in your comic book life is good for you. You know, switch it up, kick the dust up, and try stuff new. I know when I was doing a little bit of research before we got a chance to talk to you guys, Her Infernal Descent is definitely one. When the trade paperback comes out, I'll be adding to the collection there because I like the idea. The story sounds amazing, and just as somebody who spent an inordinate amount of time just in literary classes in school, Dante's Inferno was always one that I was always going back to read just fits and giggles. So I'll definitely be checking that out, and I'll definitely be checking out Come Into Me, if only because I like a little bit of weird in my life.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think Her Infernal Descent is an interesting one. It's it seems to speak to people who have had like a lifelong love with literature, like you just said yourself. And that's awesome for us to see people who pick up all the little Easter eggs that we leave in there for them.
That's amazing. And for those of our listeners that ever read, I mean, Dante's Inferno is an Easter egg riddled story from the get-go if you've read the Divine Comedy itself. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing your guys more or less take on something like that.
Yeah, and I agree. Both those books will be on my my shopping list. Is reading about them just sounds pretty awesome. Like both are kind of themes that I've been interested in right now. So
Hell yeah.
What else do you guys have going on right now? Like I know you guys mentioned that you were kind of had a film background. Like, do you guys have anything on the kind of go with that?
Yeah, I finished a documentary earlier this year that just played at a few festivals. It's called Co-Creators, and it's about the creators of the Rat Queens comic book. which is a pretty controversial history to that book. I'm not sure what's happening with it entirely after these festivals, but I have some other film projects that I'm working on. Some short films and some features that I've been writing. So hopefully I'll keep pushing and something big will happen sometime with that stuff. But right now I'm just trying to keep making some low budget stuff.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today there, guys. We know you guys are incredibly busy, so we don't want to tie you down too much. But for our listeners, if they want to hunt you guys down, whereabouts can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter. It's Zac B.E. Thompson, and you can find me on Instagram and the exact same handle.
And you can find me on Twitter. My handle is @lawn_monster. It's like basically sounds like an email address from when I was like 12 years old, but I'm not changing it.
Well, again, guys, thank you very much for joining us. And I would encourage any of our listeners out there, make sure you go out, check these guys out, either for their work in Marvel or definitely check out all their indie stuff. Change it up a little bit. Get out there, see what other people are doing in the comic book world that might help you better inform your decisions later on when you're looking for something new to read.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having us. This was really great, and we appreciate all the time you took to research and ask us questions. It always makes our job answering questions a lot easier.
Oh, hey, no worries, guys. And again, thank you very much for joining us. And like you said, like we told you earlier, you guys are the inaugural first guests on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super cool, and we'll do what we can to help push it out there when you guys post it.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much. Take care, guys.
Thanks so much.